Cold open. BIP-110 is not just a spam fight. It is a governance fight wearing a technical jacket. The surface question is simple. Should Bitcoin temporarily restrict more kinds of arbitrary data on-chain? The deeper question is more dangerous. Who gets to decide what Bitcoin is for? Steelman first. The strongest case for BIP-110 is not stupid. Supporters look at inscriptions, arbitrary blobs, oversized data pushes, and taproot pathways being used for things that are not ordinary payments. They see higher costs for people who want to run nodes. They see block space used as file storage. They see payments competing with non-payment data. And they say, Bitcoin is money, not a permanent public hard drive. BIP-110 tries to answer that by moving some data limits into consensus for roughly 1 year. The proposal would cap OP return at 83 bytes, limit data pushes and witness elements to 256 bytes, add other temporary restrictions, and then expire after about 52,416 blocks. That is the Steelman. Bitcoin should be easy to validate. Running a node should not become something only data center hobbyists can tolerate. If a use case makes validation heavier for everyone forever, supporters argue that users should be allowed to say no at the consensus layer. That argument deserves a fair hearing. Now the rebuttal. BIP-110 is not merely a filter. It is a soft fork attempt to make some currently valid transactions invalid under new rules. That is a very different category from setting your own node's relay policy. Policy says, my node does not want to relay this transaction. Consensus says, if a miner includes this transaction in a block, my node rejects the block. That difference is the whole fight. This is where people blur two very different things. Almost everyone agrees spam is annoying. Almost everyone agrees running a node should stay practical. But not everyone agrees that Bitcoin should draw a line between good and bad uses at the consensus layer. Critics hear the word spam and ask according to whom. Today it might mean inscriptions. Tomorrow it might mean CoinJoin, or a privacy tool, or a covenant, or some use case that looks ugly before it looks useful. Michael Saylor's objection, as reported by CoinDesk, was that BIP-110 turns a spam dispute into a consensus change that would invalidate some currently valid, fee-paying transactions. His warning was that the precedent is the danger. That is not a trivial objection. There is also a process issue. Bitcoin does not have a product manager. It does not have a Supreme Court. It does not have one GitHub repository that magically becomes reality because code was merged. A proposal can be technically coherent and still fail socially. A client can exist and still not become Bitcoin. A website can track support and still not create consensus. That is frustrating if you believe the proposal is obviously right. But it is also the reason Bitcoin is credible. The same slowness that annoys reformers protects holders from rushed changes. The same messy public argument that makes Bitcoin look chaotic is the immune system that stops a small faction from changing the rules for everyone else. And this is where BIP-110 becomes bigger than inscriptions. If the argument is only about today's spam, the temptation is to ask who has the cleaner aesthetic preference. If the argument is about consensus discipline, the question changes. Is this problem important enough to justify making currently valid transactions invalid? Is the solution narrow enough? Is support broad enough? And are we confident the precedent will not become a tool for the next faction that wants to restrict something it dislikes? Those are hard questions. They should be hard. Bitcoin has survived partly because changing consensus is hard. It is supposed to be hard. If the rule is 21 million, hard consensus is the feature. If the rule is this kind of data is unacceptable, hard consensus becomes much more subjective. Now the honest part. BIP-110 does not appear to have the kind of support a serious Bitcoin consensus change usually needs. CoinDesk reported support around 0.7% of miners at publication, and the public debate has pulled in people like Saylor and Adam Back on the skeptical side. Supporters may say miners are not the only constituency. That is true. Users matter. Nodes matter. Developers matter. Businesses matter. But a consensus change that lacks broad alignment is not strength. It is fragility. There is a reason this debate gets so emotional. Both sides think they are defending decentralization. Supporters look at node cost and say, if validation gets heavier forever, fewer people run nodes, and Bitcoin centralizes. Critics look at subjective restrictions and say, if consensus starts filtering unpopular uses, fewer people trust the neutrality of the system, and Bitcoin centralizes in a different way. That is why a serious answer cannot be slogans. Spam is bad is not enough. Censorship is bad is not enough. The real question is, which risk is bigger, which tool is appropriate, and whether the Bitcoin network has enough agreement to use that tool without splitting itself. The best pro BIP-110 case is, Bitcoin should stay monetary, cheap to validate, and resistant to permanent arbitrary data bloat. The best anti-BIP-110 case is, Bitcoin's neutrality is not protected by making subjective use filters into consensus rules. Both sides are defending something real. One side is defending validation cost, the other is defending neutrality and upgrade discipline. The exit velocity answer is this: use policy for preferences, use fees for scarce block space, and use consensus changes only when there is overwhelming alignment around something essential. That is not because spam is good. It is because Bitcoin's most important property is not that every user likes every transaction. It is that the rules are hard to change. If BIP-110 fails, the lesson should not be that spam won. The lesson should be that Bitcoin governance worked exactly the way a hard money network is supposed to work. Slowly, publicly, messily, and only with broad consent. Bitcoin is not clean because nobody argues. Bitcoin is credible because nobody gets to win an argument by decree. That is the point. BIP-110 asks whether Bitcoin should reject some data. The bigger question is whether Bitcoin can reject rushed consensus changes. So far, the answer looks like yes. Educational only, not financial, legal, or tax advice. This is exit velocity. Think in Bitcoin.